I'm Meghan, 28, and until 6 months ago, I hadn't spoken to my parents since they abandoned me during my final year of law school. Then my phone lit up with their number. My mother was hysterical. My golden child brother Jason had been arrested for massive fraud. Now they needed my legal expertise. The irony wasn't lost on me as I recalled my mother's exact words when I'd asked for help. "You made your bed, now lie in it." Their desperate pleas left me with an impossible choice. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect. Growing up in Wellesley, a pristine suburb of Boston, my childhood looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our four-bedroom colonial with its manicured lawn and swimming pool was the envy of the neighborhood. My father, Richard, was a senior executive at a financial services firm who wore tailored suits and played golf on weekends. My mother, Catherine, was the quintessential homemaker who volunteered at charity events and hosted dinner parties where everything had to be flawless. Then there was my brother Jason, for years younger than me. Who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes? From the moment he was born, it was clear he was the child they had always wanted. A son to carry on the family name. With my father's blue eyes and charismatic smile. I still remember my 10th birthday when I received a set of encyclopedias because they were educational, while months later, Jason's 6th birthday featured a backyard carnival complete with hired entertainers and custom-made decorations. When I brought home straight A's, my father would nod and say, "That's expected." When Jason brought home BS, there would be celebratory dinners because he was trying his best. "Jason's a boy," my mother would explain when I questioned the differences in how we were treated. "He needs more encouragement." Or my father's favorite, "Your brother has a different learning style. You're naturally studious." I learned early that in our family hierarchy, my achievements would always be diminished while Jason's mediocrity would be celebrated. During my high school graduation, where I was valedictorian, my parents spent most of the ceremony discussing Jason's upcoming baseball tournament with nearby relatives. My grandmother Ruth was the only one who saw me clearly. "You're going to outshine them all someday, Maggie," she would whisper when she visited from Vermont. She had been a legal secretary in the 1960s and encouraged my interest in law. When I was 16, she gave me a biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that I read until the spine cracked. "A lawyer in the family would be something," she said, ignoring my mother's pursed lips. It was from Grandma Ruth that I inherited my stubbornness and sense of fairness. The first major family conflict erupted when I chose to attend University of Massachusetts on a merit scholarship instead of my parents' alma mater, Dartmouth. My father didn't speak to me for weeks. "We've been legacy donors for generations," he fumed when he finally acknowledged my decision. "Do you know how embarrassing this is?" My mother was more subtle in her disappointment. "I just don't understand why you'd choose a state school when we could afford better," she said, folding laundry with sharp, angry movements. What I couldn't make them understand was that I wanted something that was mine, something I had earned rather than something they had given me. Plus, UMass had an excellent pre-law program with connections to Boston legal firms. Meanwhile, 2 years later, when Jason announced he wanted to attend my father's beloved Dartmouth, my parents threw a party. They bought him a new car for the occasion, a luxury I had never been offered. "Jason needs reliable transportation for the long drives home," my mother explained when I pointed out the disparity. Throughout college, I worked part-time jobs while maintaining my GPA. Jason joined a fraternity and barely maintained the grades needed to stay eligible for the lacrosse team. My parents regularly sent him extra money for social activities while telling me that working would build character. Despite all this, I excelled. I graduated summa cum laude and was accepted to Boston University Law School with a partial scholarship. My parents attended my graduation, but spent most of the dinner afterward discussing Jason's summer internship at a friend's investment firm. "Networking is everything in business," my father said proudly. "Jason's got the personality for it." I nodded and smiled, having long ago accepted that nothing I accomplished would ever eclipse Jason's smallest victories in their eyes. What I didn't know then was how prophetic my father's words about networking would become, or how Jason's personality for business would eventually unravel our family's carefully constructed facade. Law school was challenging but fulfilling. I discovered a talent for understanding complex financial regulations, ironically specializing in the very fields that would later become relevant to Jason's crimes. By my second year, I had secured a prestigious summer internship at Wilson & Gray, where I met Thomas Barrett, a senior partner who became my mentor. "You've got a natural instinct for this," Thomas told me after I helped research a complicated securities fraud case. "You see patterns others miss." For once, someone valued my abilities without comparison to someone else. It was during this period that I began to create distance from my family, limiting visits home and keeping conversations superficial when we did speak. I was building my own life, one where I could be valued for who I was rather than diminished for not being Jason. Little did I know that the ultimate family reckoning was still to come, and that it would begin with the most difficult year of my life. My final year of law school arrived with the intensity one had expected. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly life could spiral out of control. The fall semester began with a punishing schedule, advanced classes, law review responsibilities, and an internship at a respected firm specializing in financial crimes. Thomas had arranged the internship, seeing my potential in that field. "You're going to make a name for yourself," he assured me. "Just keep your head down and power through this year." I was doing exactly that when the first disaster struck. During a routine physical required for my internship, the doctor found an abnormality that required further testing. 3 weeks and several appointments later, I sat in a sterile office as a specialist explained I needed surgery to remove a growth that, while likely benign, could become problematic. "We should schedule this as soon as possible," she said, sliding over a folder of information. "The recovery will take about 2 weeks." I nodded numbly, already calculating how this would affect my classes and internship. But the real shock came when I contacted my insurance company. As a student with basic coverage, my policy had a $5,000 deductible before coverage kicked in. The total cost would exceed $12,000. The timing couldn't have been worse. My savings had been depleted paying for bar exam preparation courses and application fees. My part-time research position barely covered rent and groceries. I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in Alston, nothing fancy but close enough to campus that I could walk and save on transportation costs. Then the second disaster hit. During an unusually heavy rainstorm, the ancient plumbing in my apartment building backed up, flooding my ground floor unit with 6 inches of water. I returned from a late night at the library to find my possessions soaking in dirty water. My laptop, textbooks, class notes, furniture, clothes, almost everything was damaged. The building's insurance would cover structural repairs, but not personal possessions. My renter's insurance had a high deductible that made claiming smaller items impractical. I salvaged what I could and moved into a hotel using my emergency credit card while the apartment was being repaired. Sitting in that hotel room, surrounded by garbage bags of damp belongings, I made the call I had been dreading. My parents had money. They weren't wealthy enough to consider $12,000 insignificant, but they could certainly afford to help with medical expenses. After all, they had just purchased Jason a $30,000 car for getting a minor promotion at the investment firm where he'd been working since graduation. My mother answered on the 4th ring. "Meghan, is everything all right? You never call on weeknights." I explained the situation as calmly as possible, keeping my voice steady as I outlined the medical necessity, the insurance gap, and the apartment disaster. I asked if they could help with a loan for the medical expenses, promising to repay them once I was established in my career. There was a long pause before my mother said, "Let me get your father." I heard muffled conversation, then my father's voice, cold and dismissive. "Meghan, this is exactly the problem with your life choices. You've always insisted on doing things your way, and now you're facing the consequences. Dad, I have a medical issue that needs surgery. This isn't about life choices. You chose that second-rate insurance when you could have stayed on our family plan if you'd gone to Dartmouth. You chose to live in that decrepit building to save money. And now you expect us to bail you out. I gripped the phone tighter. I'm not asking for a bailout. I'm asking for a loan to cover a medical emergency. We're already supporting Jason while he establishes himself. He's just put a down payment on a condo, and we're helping with that. We can't be expected to support both of you at this stage. Support both of us? I was incredulous. I've never asked you for money before. Not once since I started college. My mother's voice cut in, the phone apparently on speaker now. Honey, we just think it's time you learn to handle your own problems. You've always been so independent. The conversation deteriorated from there. My father brought up every decision I'd ever made that diverged from his plan for me. My mother alternated between passive agreement with him and weak attempts at sympathy that rang hollow. The final blow came when my father said, Jason would never have let things get to this point. He understands the value of family connections and proper planning. That's when I realized nothing I could say would matter. In their eyes, Jason's every success was evidence of his superior character, while my every struggle was evidence of my failings. I ended the call abruptly, tears streaming down my face. 3 days later, I saw on social media that my parents had surprised Jason with a new boat to celebrate a client he'd brought to the firm. The photos showed them beaming with pride at a marina. Champagne glasses raised in celebration. I blocked both my parents and Jason on all platforms that day. My friend Rachel found me the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, staring blankly at my laptop where I'd been unsuccessfully trying to focus on coursework. She had been calling repeatedly, concerned when I didn't show up for our study group. You're staying with me, she said firmly after I explained what had happened. No arguments. Rachel's tiny 2-bedroom apartment already housed her and another roommate, but they cleared space in the living room. For the next month, I slept on an air mattress while trying to keep my life from completely unraveling. Thomas arranged for the law firm to advance me some money against future work. The surgery was scheduled, performed, and thankfully confirmed the growth was benign. Rachel drove me to follow-up appointments and made sure I took my medications. Throughout my recovery, my phone remained silent. No calls from my parents asking how the surgery went. No texts checking if I needed anything. Just silence that spoke volumes about where I stood in their priorities. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I forced myself to attend classes, to complete assignments, to function, but joy had been stripped from everything. The betrayal by my parents cut deeper than I had expected, exposing the painful truth I had long tried to ignore. Their love had always been conditional, and I had never met the conditions. By the time I was physically recovered, I had made a decision. I would complete my degree, pass the bar, and build a life without them. The family that had raised me was now in my past. Whatever happened to them going forward was no longer my concern. I had no way of knowing then how dramatically that resolution would be tested. The months following my parents' rejection were a masterclass in resilience. After recovering from surgery, I moved from Rachel's couch to a small bedroom in a 3-person apartment in Brighton. My roommates were a nurse and a graduate student in engineering, both busy enough that the apartment remained quiet for studying. My new financial reality meant working whenever I wasn't in class or studying. I took on additional paralegal work at a small firm, spending weekends organizing case files and drafting basic legal documents. The pay was modest but steady, and with careful budgeting, I slowly began to dig myself out of the hole. You're working too hard, Rachel commented one evening when I canceled our dinner plans to take on an extra shift. You're going to burn out before graduation. I don't have a choice, I replied, already gathering my materials. These medical bills won't pay themselves. The truth was, Work provided a welcome distraction from the hurt that still surfaced in quiet moments. Every time I saw a parent and child having lunch together near campus, or overheard classmates talking about weekend visits home, the rejection would wash over me anew. Spring arrived, bringing with it a small but significant change in my circumstances. I met Andrew at a law school function where he was representing his firm, a mid-sized practice specializing in corporate law. He was 32, for years my senior, with kind eyes and a quick wit that made even the driest legal discussions entertaining. "So you're the one Thomas keeps talking about," he said after reading my name tag. "He says you're going to revolutionize financial crime prosecution someday." I blushed, immune to such direct praise. "Thomas exaggerates. I'm just trying to graduate at this point." Our conversation lasted well past the networking portion of the event and ended with an exchange of phone numbers. Unlike other men I'd dated who seemed intimidated by my career ambitions, Andrew found them admirable. He had built his own career from scratch, working through college as the son of a single mother who taught high school English. "You don't need anyone to rescue you," he told me on our third date. "But everyone needs someone to stand beside them." With Andrew's emotional support and my own determination, I not only maintained my academic standing but excelled. By the time graduation approached, I had secured a recommendation from Thomas and a position waiting for me at Cooper, Williams & Stern, a respected firm with a growing white-collar crime division. Graduation day arrived with a bittersweet quality. As I donned my cap and gown, I couldn't help but feel the absence of family more acutely than usual. Rachel sensed my mood and arrived at my apartment that morning with a bouquet of flowers and a card signed by all our study group members. "Your real family is here today," she said, hugging me tightly. Andrew attended the ceremony, taking photos and cheering loudly when my name was called. Afterward, instead of the formal family dinner I had once envisioned, Rachel and Andrew took me to my favorite restaurant in the North End. They had arranged for a small gathering of friends to join us, each bringing thoughtful gifts and genuine congratulations. To Meghan, Andrew toasted, raising his glass. "Who proves that true strength isn't about never falling, but about rising every time you fall." That night, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was, I realized I was building something more authentic than what I had lost. These relationships weren't burdened by expectations or comparisons. They were based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The bar exam loomed next, a marathon of preparation and stress. I converted our small dining area into a study headquarters, covering the walls with notes and legal principles. Andrew brought dinner on late study nights, sometimes working quietly on his own cases nearby just to provide company. When results were posted, I had not only passed but scored in the top percentile. The email confirmation arrived while I was having coffee with Rachel. "I passed," I said, staring at my phone in disbelief. "Of course you did," Rachel replied, as if any other outcome was inconceivable. "Was there ever any doubt?" There had been plenty of doubt, in fact. Moments when the stress and lingering trauma threatened to overwhelm me. Times when I questioned whether I had the resilience to keep pushing forward. But I had done it, without the safety net of family support that many of my classmates took for granted. My position at Cooper, Williams & Stern began in September. The firm occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown building with views of Boston Harbor. My office was small but had an actual door rather than the cubicle I had expected as a new associate. On my first day, Thomas sent a plant with a note that read simply, "Roots before branches. Take your time growing here." The work was demanding but fascinating. I was assigned to junior roles on several financial crime cases, reviewing documentation and helping prepare for depositions. My background and specialized knowledge didn't go unnoticed, and by the end of my second month, I was given more responsibility than was typical for someone at my level. "You have a gift for this," my direct supervisor commented after I identified a pattern in banking transactions that others had missed. Not everyone can see through the noise to find the signal. Meanwhile, Andrew and I grew closer. We established a comfortable rhythm, spending weekends at his apartment in Beacon Hill and weeknights at mine when work kept us late. He never pushed for details about my family situation, but offered a listening ear whenever I felt ready to share pieces of that story. 6 months into my new job, I won my first significant motion in court, successfully arguing for certain financial records to be admissible in a fraud case. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of the case, but a personal milestone. That evening, Andrew took me to dinner to celebrate. "I have something to ask you," he said as we finished dessert. "My lease is up next month, and I was thinking, maybe we could look for a place together?" The prospect of sharing a home, of building a life with someone who celebrated rather than diminished me felt like the next step in my journey toward healing. I agreed. And we found a 2-bedroom apartment in Brookline with a small office space we could both use. As we unpacked our combined belongings, I came across a box of family photos I had kept despite everything. There was one of Jason and me as children, building a sandcastle at Cape Cod. One of the rare occasions when we had played together as equals rather than competitors. "Do you miss them?" Andrew asked quietly, noticing my pensive expression. "I miss who I thought they were," I answered after a moment. "Or maybe who I wanted them to be." I placed the photo back in the box and continued unpacking books for our new shared bookshelf. My new life was taking shape, built on my own terms. I had no way of knowing that my carefully constructed independence was about to be challenged in the most unexpected way. The call came at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, just as Andrew and I were getting ready for bed. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, my mother's name flashing on the screen. In the 6 months since I had started my new job, there had been no contact from either of my parents, no birthday card, no holiday greetings. Nothing to acknowledge my passing the bar or securing a position at a respected firm. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. Andrew glanced over, raising an eyebrow in silent question. "It's my mother," I said, my voice hollow with surprise. "Are you going to answer it?" After another ring, I picked up, bracing myself. "Hello?" The sound that came through wasn't immediately recognizable as my mother's voice. It was raw, hysterical, punctuated by sobs. "Meghan?" "Oh God, Meghan, it's Jason. He's been arrested." I sat up straighter, motioning for Andrew to turn off the television. "Mom, slow down. What happened?" The story spilled out in a chaotic rush. Federal agents had arrived at Jason's office that morning. He had been let out in handcuffs while his colleagues watched. Simultaneously, other agents had appeared at my parents' home with a search warrant, confiscating computers and financial records. "They're saying he ran some kind of investment scheme," my mother said, her voice breaking. "They're calling it fraud, embezzlement. They're saying he took people's retirement money. It can't be true. There must be some mistake." But even through the phone, I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. This wasn't a mother certain of her son's innocence. This was a mother desperately hoping for innocence despite mounting evidence to the contrary. "What exactly is he being charged with?" I asked, automatically shifting into lawyer mode. "Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering," she recited, as if reading from a document. "The amounts they're talking about, Meghan, millions. They're saying he took millions." My mind raced through the implications. These were serious federal charges. The kind that carried lengthy prison sentences. The kind that required specialized legal defense. "Where is he now?" I asked. "They're holding him. The bail hearing is tomorrow. Your father is trying to find a criminal attorney, but everyone he's called says they need time to review the case before taking it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Meghan, they're saying this could be in the newspapers tomorrow. Everyone will know." And there was the true crisis in my mother's mind. Not just that her son was facing serious criminal charges, but that their social standing was about to collapse. What do you want from me, Mom? I asked directly, already suspecting the answer. You're a lawyer now, she said, as if I might have forgotten. You understand these things. We need your help, your expertise. You could look at the charges, tell us what to expect, maybe even represent him. I closed my eyes, processing the magnitude of what she was asking. Mom, I'm a first-year associate specializing in corporate law. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, and even if I were, I couldn't represent my own brother. There are ethical considerations. But you could advise us, she pressed. You know people now, don't you? At your firm? You could ask around. Find someone good who would take his case quickly. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of dismissing my career choices, my parents were now desperately reaching for the very connections they had once belittled. I need to think about this, I said finally. It's complicated. Complicated? My mother's voice rose sharply. He's your brother, Meghan. Family helps family. The statement hit me like a physical blow, reopening wounds I thought had started to heal. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, ending the call before she could respond. Andrew, who had heard enough to understand the situation, watched me carefully. Are you okay? No, I admitted. But I need to be. The next day brought details that made the situation even clearer. Jason's name was indeed in the newspapers, associated with a fraud scheme that had targeted dozens of investors, many of them retirees who had trusted him with their life savings. The amounts mentioned exceeded $10 million. I spent my lunch break researching the case, using the firm's legal databases to pull whatever public information was available. The complaint painted a damning picture. Jason had established a legitimate-looking investment fund, but had diverted substantial portions of the money for personal use while fabricating returns to keep investors satisfied. When my mother called again that afternoon, she sounded even more desperate. Jason had been denied bail due to flight risk concerns. My father had found an attorney, but the retainer was astronomical and their assets were potentially subject to seizure as part of the investigation. We need to meet, she said. Please, Meghan. Just a conversation. After consulting with Andrew and spending a sleepless night weighing my options, I agreed to meet my parents at a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and their home. I chose a public location deliberately, wanting neutral ground for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. They arrived before me, already seated at a corner table when I walked in. The change in their appearance was shocking. My father, always impeccably groomed, had stubble on his chin and deep circles under his eyes. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by a hunched defensive stance. My mother, who typically wouldn't leave the house without perfect hair and makeup, looked gray and diminished, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of vindication seeing them brought low, followed immediately by shame at the thought. I took a deep breath and approached the table. Meghan, my mother said, half rising before sinking back down. Thank you for coming. My father nodded stiffly but said nothing, his eyes avoiding mine. I sat across from them, placing my bag on the empty chair beside me. I've read what's publicly available about Jason's case, I began, keeping my voice professionally detached. It's serious. They've got it all wrong, my father interjected, a flash of his old certainty returning. Jason wouldn't do what they're saying. The indictment is detailed, I countered. They've tracked specific transactions, matched them to purchases he made. They have emails, Dad. Everyone makes mistakes, he insisted. Jason might have cut some corners, but he's not a criminal. The familiar pattern of excuses for Jason was so predictable it would have been funny if the situation weren't so grave. Even now, with his son facing federal charges supported by substantial evidence, my father was minimizing and justifying. Have you spoken with him? I asked. My mother nodded. Briefly yesterday. He sounded scared. Not himself. He should be scared, I said plainly. If convicted on all counts, he's looking at potentially 15 to 20 years. My mother stifled a sob, fumbling for a tissue in her purse. My father reached over and awkwardly patted her hand, a rare gesture of comfort from a man who typically dismissed emotional displays. "That's why we need your help," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "You understand this world now. You have connections. What exactly are you asking me to do?" I kept my tone neutral. "Professional. Advise us, guide us through this," my mother pleaded. "Maybe join his defense team, or at least consult with whoever we hire. You always understood complex things, Meghan. You could help explain what's happening, what to expect." I took a sip of my coffee, using the moment to gather my thoughts. "The last time we spoke," I said carefully, "was when I called asking for help during a medical emergency. You told me I had made my bed and needed to lie in it." My father shifted uncomfortably. "That was different. Was it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems remarkably similar. Someone in the family needed help during a crisis. The only difference is who that someone is. We can make things right," my father said, leaning forward. "Financially, I mean. Whatever you needed then, we can provide now." And there it was, the offer I might once have desperately wanted, but that now felt hollow and transactional. Not an acknowledgement of their failure as parents, but a business proposition. "Help us, and we'll compensate you." "This isn't about money," I said quietly. It never was. The coffee shop hummed with afternoon activity, students typing on laptops, business people having casual meetings, baristas calling out completed orders. None of them aware of the family drama unfolding at our corner table. "Then what is it about?" my father demanded, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Tell us what you want, and we'll do it. We need your help, Meghan. Jason needs your help." I studied him. This man who had shaped so much of my early life with his approval and disapproval. In his eyes, I could see something I'd rarely witnessed before: desperation. Richard Matthews, always in control, always certain of his position in the world, was floundering. "I want you to understand what you did," I said finally. "Not just apologize because you need something from me now, but truly understand." My mother reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of touching mine. "We know we hurt you, sweetheart. We should have helped when you asked." "It's more than that one incident," I replied, pulling my hand back slightly. "It's a lifetime of treating Jason and me differently. A lifetime of celebrating his mediocrity while taking my achievements for granted." My father's face flushed. "That's not fair. We've always been proud of you." "Really? When was the last time you told me that?" I challenged. "When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing, not because you needed something?" Neither of them answered, the silence confirming what we all knew. "Do you want to know what I discovered after you refused to help me?" I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion rising in my chest. "I discovered I could survive without you. I found people who value me for who I am, not for how I reflect on them." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We've made mistakes, Meghan. Terrible mistakes. But Jason is in real trouble." "I know he is. And based on what I've read, the trouble is largely of his own making." I pulled out a folder containing printouts of news articles and court documents. "Did you know the victims include elderly couples who lost their entire retirement savings? Did you know he used investor money to buy that boat you were so proudly photographed on?" My father reached for the papers, scanning them with increasing alarm. "This can't be right. Jason wouldn't target vulnerable people." According to the indictment, he specifically marketed to retirees, promising them stable returns and minimal risk while knowing the investments were fraudulent. I tapped a particular paragraph. He told an 80-year-old former school teacher that her $200,000 was as safe as if it were in a bank vault. That money is gone now. As they read through the documents, I could see the reality of Jason's actions beginning to penetrate their denial. My mother's hand trembled as she turned pages, my father's jaw clenched tighter with each new detail. There must be some explanation, my mother whispered. But the conviction in her voice was fading. The explanation is that Jason made choices, I said. Just like I made choices. The difference is that when my choices led to difficulties, I was told to face the consequences alone. When his choices led to crimes, you immediately looked for someone to rescue him. My father set the papers down, his shoulders slumping slightly. What would you have us do? Abandon him? No, that's not what I'm saying. I leaned forward, making sure they were both listening carefully. I'm saying that your reaction to his crisis versus your reaction to mine reveals everything about how you've always seen us. And I need you to acknowledge that before we can move forward. There was a long pause. My father stared at his coffee cup, turning it slowly between his hands. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. We always expected more from you. My father finally admitted, his voice low. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. Jason needed more. Guidance. That's not an excuse, I replied. That's exactly the problem. You expected perfection from me while making endless excuses for him. And look where that led. We thought we were being good parents, my mother said. We thought we were giving each of you what you needed. What I needed was to be valued for who I am, not held to an impossible standard while watching my brother receive praise for minimal effort. The words poured out now, years of unspoken hurt finding release. What I needed was parents who would be there during the hardest moment of my life. Not who would tell me my difficulties were my own fault. My father's face showed a rare glimpse of shame. I was wrong to refuse when you needed help, he admitted. I was proud, too proud. And now? I asked, are you here because you've had a genuine change of heart, or because you need something only I can provide? They exchanged a glance, and in that look, I saw the truth they couldn't quite bring themselves to articulate. They were here because they were desperate, because their perfect son was in trouble too deep for them to handle alone, because their social world was collapsing and they needed someone with my specific knowledge. I thought so, I said quietly. Does that mean you won't help? My mother asked. New panic edging into her voice. I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. I can't represent Jason directly. It would be an ethical conflict given our relationship. And it's not my area of expertise. But more importantly, I won't be manipulated by a sudden interest in reconciliation that's motivated by your need for my professional connections. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand. However, I continued, I can provide you with information about what to expect from the legal process. I can recommend attorneys who specialize in federal financial crimes. And I can help you understand the case against Jason and what options might be available to him. Relief flooded their faces, quickly replaced by confusion when I added, but I have conditions. What conditions? My father asked warily. First, this isn't a reconciliation. I'm offering limited professional guidance as a courtesy, not stepping back into the family role you defined for me. Second, if I recommend attorneys or resources, you'll respect their expertise rather than pushing for special treatment because Jason is your son. And third, I paused, making sure they understood the importance of this final point. You need to face the very real possibility that Jason did exactly what he's accused of doing. My mother shook her head reflexively. You don't know that. No, I don't. But neither do you. And part of why Jason is in this situation is because you've spent his entire life making excuses for his behavior rather than holding him accountable. My father's face hardened. That's not fair. Meghan, we raised him to be honest. Did you? Or did you raise him to believe that rules applied differently to him? That he could always be bailed out of consequences? I gathered my belongings, preparing to leave. Those are questions you should be asking yourselves right now. As I stood, my mother reached out and caught my wrist. Please, she whispered. Whatever you think of us, Jason is still your brother. I looked down at her hand, then into her eyes. I survived without you when I needed parents, I said, my voice steady and clear. Jason will have to learn to survive now that he needs a sister. Their faces froze in identical expressions of shock as the words landed. Not anger, not defiance, but the dawning realization that the dynamics they had established and reinforced throughout our childhood had created consequences they never anticipated. I walked out of the coffee shop into the crisp autumn air, feeling the weight of years of unresolved emotions beginning to lift. For the first time since their call had disrupted my carefully reconstructed life, I felt certain of my path forward. The walk home from the coffee shop took me along the Charles River, where fall had transformed the landscape into a canvas of reds and golds. I found myself moving slowly, processing the confrontation with my parents and the complex emotions it had stirred. By the time I reached our apartment, Andrew was home from work, making dinner in our small kitchen. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. "Rough meeting?" he asked, putting down the knife he was using to chop vegetables. "You could say that." I dropped my bag and coat, sinking onto a kitchen stool. I told them I'd provide some information, but not directly represent Jason. Then I'd basically told them they created the situation by always letting Jason off the hook. Andrew handed me a glass of wine. "How did they take that?" "About as well as you'd expect." I took a long sip. They looked broken. Part of me felt vindicated seeing them finally face consequences. The other part felt guilty for feeling that way. "That's understandable," he said, returning to his cooking. "They hurt you deeply. It's natural to want them to recognize that pain." Over dinner, I explained the details of Jason's case and the ethical quandary I faced. As a lawyer, I had access to resources and knowledge that could help his defense. As his sister, I had every reason to keep my distance from a family that had abandoned me when I needed them most. "What would you do if he weren't your brother?" Andrew asked thoughtfully. "If this were just someone you knew peripherally who needed legal guidance?" It was the right question, one that forced me to separate my personal feelings from my professional ethics. I'd probably provide basic information about the process and refer them to appropriate counsel, I admitted. "Then maybe that's your answer." The next morning, I spoke with Thomas, my mentor, explaining the situation in broad terms without revealing all the family dynamics. "Legally speaking, you're right that you can't represent him directly," Thomas confirmed. "The conflict of interest is clear. But providing general information about the process or making a referral is perfectly acceptable." "What would you do?" I asked. Thomas considered the question carefully. "I'd maintain clear boundaries. Help in ways that are ethically sound but protect yourself emotionally. This isn't just a legal matter for you, it's family trauma." Over the next few days, my parents called repeatedly. I let most go to voicemail, responding with brief texts that I was gathering information and would be in touch. Meanwhile, I discreetly reached out to colleagues who specialized in white-collar criminal defense, getting recommendations without explicitly mentioning my brother's case. A week after our coffee shop meeting, my next-door neighbor Eleanor knocked on my door. Eleanor was in her 70s. A retired school principal with a no-nonsense manner I'd always appreciated. "Your mother came by earlier," she said when I opened the door. "She asked me to give you this." She handed me an envelope with my name written in my mother's distinctive handwriting. "I didn't know you knew my parents," I said, surprised. "I don't, not really," Eleanor replied. "But she seemed desperate to get this to you. Said you weren't answering her calls." After Eleanor left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother, explaining that they had found an attorney for Jason, but were struggling to understand the legal process. She wrote about visiting Jason in detention, describing his uncharacteristic humility and apparent remorse. The letter ended with a simple plea: "We know we don't deserve your help, but Jason might." That evening, I researched Jason's case more thoroughly, using the firm's resources to access public records. What I found disturbed me deeply. The evidence against him was substantial. Emails where he explicitly discussed misleading investors, bank records showing transfers to personal accounts, luxury purchases made with what appeared to be diverted funds. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a few corners cut. This was systematic fraud. Yet another part of the documentation gave me pause. In several instances, Jason had expressed reservations about the scheme in communications with his business partner, who had subsequently pressured him to continue. This didn't excuse his actions, but suggested he might not have been the primary architect. The internal conflict kept me awake that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I would provide limited assistance through proper channels, maintaining professional boundaries while offering basic guidance any family member might provide. I called my parents and outlined my terms clearly. I would not directly participate in Jason's defense, but I would prepare an information packet about the legal process and potential defense strategies. I would recommend qualified attorneys from my professional network, but I would not use my position to seek special treatment. And most importantly, any ongoing relationship would require acknowledgement of past patterns and commitment to change. These are non-negotiable terms, I concluded. Take them or leave them. After a brief silence, my father agreed, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. The most difficult step came next. Visiting Jason in the detention center. I had not seen my brother in over a year, and I braced myself for the familiar dynamic, his charm, my parents' favoritism, my inevitable relegation to the background. The reality was starkly different. The confident, carefree brother I remembered was gone, replaced by a subdued figure in a beige jumpsuit. His usual perfect appearance diminished by institutional living. When he saw me, surprise registered on his face, followed by something I rarely associated with Jason, humility. "Meghan," he said as we sat across from each other in the visitors' area. "I didn't expect you to come." "Neither did I admitted. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Mom told me you're helping them understand what's happening. Thank you for that." I studied him, looking for signs of the manipulation he had always been skilled at. Instead, I saw genuine distress. "I'm not doing it for them," I said finally. "I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do professionally." Jason nodded, accepting this without challenge. "I really messed up, Meg. It started small, just moving some numbers around to make returns look better than they were. Then it snowballed." His candor surprised me. "The evidence looks pretty damning." "It is." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "Greg was the one who pushed to target retirees. Said they were less likely to ask detailed questions. I knew it was wrong, but I went along with it." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm not trying to excuse what I did. Just explain it. Why are you telling me this?" "It could hurt your case if I were deposed." "Because I'm tired of lying," he said simply. "To investors, to Mom and Dad, to myself. And because..." He hesitated. "I owe you an apology that's 28 years overdue." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "I always knew, Meghan. I knew they treated us differently. I knew they made excuses for me while holding you to impossible standards. And I never said anything because it benefited me." The admission hit me with unexpected force. All those years, I had assumed Jason was oblivious to the disparate treatment, wrapped in the cocoon of parental adoration. To hear that he had been aware, had recognized the unfairness, but accepted it for his advantage, was both vindicating and painful. "That doesn't change anything," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I know." He looked down at his hands. "But I wanted you to know that I see it now. Really see it. And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you." As our visiting time neared its end, Jason asked about my life, genuine questions about my career, my relationship with Andrew, my new apartment. For perhaps the first time, our conversation felt like one between equals rather than the performances we had both been locked into by our parents' expectations. Before I left, I told him about David Geller, a defense attorney I knew who specialized in federal financial crimes. "He's tough but fair," He won't promise miracles, but he'll give you the best possible defense. Will you be involved? Jason asked. I'll put together information that might help, but I can't be directly involved in your defense. There are ethical boundaries I won't cross. He nodded, accepting this limitation without protest. Whatever happens with the case, I hope someday we might, I don't know, start over? As adults, without all the baggage. I couldn't make that promise yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the future too uncertain. But as I left the detention center, I felt a shift in my perspective, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward a new understanding. That evening, I compiled a detailed information packet for Jason's defense team, outlining potential strategies based on the public evidence and including references to similar cases with their outcomes. I was careful to maintain professional distance while providing genuinely useful information. When I emailed the materials to my parents and to David Geller, who had agreed to consult on the case, I included a clear statement of my boundaries. This information is provided as a professional courtesy. I will not be directly involved in Jason's defense beyond this point. Any future family contact will be contingent on respect for these boundaries. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation. But it was a step toward something new, a relationship defined by my terms rather than theirs, with clear boundaries protecting the independent life I had built. 6 months passed like a slow turning page. Winter yielded to spring, tree branches once bare now dotted with tender green buds. The world moved forward in its relentless cycle. And, surprisingly, so did I. Jason's case progressed through the legal system with the deliberate pace typical of federal prosecutions. David Geller, the attorney I had recommended, proved to be exactly what the situation required, honest about the challenges, strategic in his approach, and unwilling to entertain magical thinking about miracle outcomes. Following his advice, Jason ultimately accepted a plea deal. In exchange for testimony against his business partner Greg, who had indeed been the primary architect of the scheme, he received a reduced sentence of 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3. The plea agreement also included a restitution plan for the victims, though many would never recover their full investments. I learned of the agreement through a brief email from my father, factual and devoid of the excuses that had characterized his earlier communications about Jason's situation. The shift in tone wasn't lost on me. Would you be willing to meet for dinner next week? He wrote at the end, there are things your mother and I need to say to you in person. After consulting with Andrew and giving myself time to consider what I wanted from such a meeting, I agreed to a dinner at a neutral restaurant, one without family history attached to it. The parents who arrived at the restaurant were markedly different from those I had confronted in the coffee shop months earlier. My father had lost weight, the confident set of his shoulders replaced by a more thoughtful posture. My mother's face showed new lines, but her eyes seemed clearer somehow, less concerned with appearances. Thank you for coming, my father began after we had ordered. We've been seeing a therapist, your mother and I, both individually and together. This was perhaps the last thing I had expected him to say. Richard Matthews had always dismissed therapy as excuse-making for people who couldn't handle life. It was Catherine's idea, he continued, giving my mother a glance that held something I rarely witnessed between them, genuine respect. She insisted after everything happened with Jason. And after what you said to us. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand, remembering, perhaps, how I had pulled away at our last meeting. We've been doing a lot of talking about patterns. Family patterns that go back generations. Things we never questioned because they were just how things were done. What kind of patterns? I asked, curious despite my guardedness. The way we raised you and Jason, my father answered. The different expectations, the different responses to your successes and failures. Our therapist helped us see how much of that came from our own upbringings. That doesn't excuse it, my mother added quickly. Understanding the source doesn't make what we did right. We failed you, Meghan. Not just when you needed financial help, but throughout your life. We never gave you the recognition you deserved." I sat in silence, absorbing their words. Part of me, the wounded child who had spent years seeking parental approval, wanted to immediately accept this apparent change of heart. The wiser adult who had built a life without them remained cautious. "What exactly are you hoping for from this conversation?" I asked finally. My father looked down at his hands, a gesture so uncharacteristic it momentarily disoriented me. "We're not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly. "We haven't earned that. We're just asking for a chance to try to be better. To learn how to be the parents you always deserved." "And what does that look like to you?" "That's for you to define," my mother said. "We'd like to be part of your life, but on terms that feel safe and respectful to you. We want to know the remarkable woman you've become, if you're willing to let us." The dinner continued with tentative conversation. They asked about my work, listening attentively to my explanation of cases I was handling. They inquired about Andrew with genuine interest rather than the evaluative assessment they would have once supplied to anyone I dated. When the check came, my father didn't automatically reach for it as he once would have, instead asking if I preferred to split it. These were small things, but they signaled a shift in dynamics that felt significant. As we parted, I didn't commit to regular contact but agreed to a monthly dinner, a limited reconnection that would allow me to assess their commitment to change without exposing myself to old patterns. In the weeks that followed, I was surprised by a handwritten letter from my father, 10 pages detailing specific memories of times he had diminished my achievements or compared me unfavorably to Jason, each followed by a clear acknowledgement of the harm caused. It wasn't poetry, and at times his corporate background showed through in the somewhat formal language, but its authenticity was undeniable. "I always thought being a good father meant pushing you to excellence," he wrote near the end. What I failed to understand was that excellence without recognition or support isn't parenting, it's just pressure. Meanwhile, my career continued to flourish. The firm assigned me to increasingly complex cases, and I developed a reputation for thoroughness and insight. Andrew and I settled into a comfortable rhythm in our shared apartment, discussing future plans that included possible marriage when the timing felt right for both of us. Rachel remained a constant presence, now dating a surgical resident she had met through hospital charity work. Our Sunday brunches became a tradition, a space where I could process the evolving situation with my family, with someone who had witnessed the worst of what had come before. "They seem to be really trying," she observed after I described my third monthly dinner with my parents. "But what matters is how you feel about it." "I'm cautiously optimistic," I admitted. "They're different. Or trying to be." My mother asked about boundaries yesterday, actually used that word. For months after Jason began serving his sentence, I received a request to add my name to his approved visitors list. After consideration, I agreed to a monthly visit, separate from my parents' regular visitations. The detention facility where he was housed was a minimum security federal prison camp, still institutional, but lacking the harsher atmosphere of higher security facilities. Jason had been assigned to the financial office, using his skills in a controlled environment while participating in mandatory counseling and education programs. "It's strange," he told me during one visit. "I have more genuine conversations here than I ever did on the outside. No one's impressed by who Dad is or what car I drove. It's oddly freeing." We developed a tentative relationship based on adult terms rather than childhood roles. Jason asked thoughtful questions about my cases, offering insights from his perspective on the other side of financial regulations. I found myself actually enjoying our conversations, free from the competitive undercurrent that had always colored our interactions. "Mom and Dad are different with you now," he observed during my third visit. Mom told me about the therapy, how they're working on the favoritism thing. "They're trying," I acknowledged. "It's a work in progress." "I'm glad," he said simply. "You deserved better than what we all gave you." 6 months into this new family arrangement, I invited my parents to our apartment for dinner. Andrew cooked his signature lasagna, and I watched with interest as my father engaged him in conversation about his career without the judgmental undertone that would once have been inevitable. After dinner, my mother helped me clear the table while the men moved to the living room to discuss a recent Supreme Court decision. In the kitchen, she paused, a plate in her hands. "Eleanor from next door stopped by last week," she said. "She told me how you helped her with that issue with her landlord." I nodded, remembering the simple legal advice I had provided that had prevented Eleanor's eviction after a property management change. "She said you wouldn't take any payment, that you spent hours researching tenant rights for her." My mother placed the plate in the dishwasher. "She called you her guardian angel." "It wasn't a big deal," I said, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "That's what makes it remarkable, Meghan. You don't even see how exceptional your kindness is." She straightened, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Not because of your career success or your education, but because of your heart. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see that clearly." The words I had longed to hear throughout my childhood landed differently now. They were welcome, but no longer desperately needed. I had built a life where my value wasn't determined by parental approval. "Thank you," I said simply, accepting the sentiment without either dismissing or overvaluing it. The following weekend, Andrew and I visited Jason together. It was Andrew's first time meeting my brother, and I watched with interest as they interacted without the weight of family mythology coloring their impressions of each other. "He's not what I expected," Andrew commented on the drive home. "He's more self-aware. Prison has been clarifying for him," I replied. "Stripped away a lot of the performance. A bit like how your medical crisis stripped away pretenses with your parents," he observed. "Sometimes it takes a catastrophe to reveal what's real." He was right, though the comparison hadn't occurred to me before. Both Jason and I had experienced moments of reckoning that forced authenticity. The difference was that mine had initially isolated me from family support, while his had begun a process of family reconstruction. As we neared the 1-year mark since that late-night phone call that had upended my carefully separated life, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The family I now had limited but meaningful contact with was not the same family that had rejected me in my time of need. They were humbler, more thoughtful, more willing to examine their own behaviors and assumptions. I hadn't fully forgiven them. Some wounds were too deep for simple resolution, but I had found a way to engage with them that protected my hard-won independence while allowing for the possibility of nothing new to grow in the space between us. On a bright Sunday afternoon, I visited my grandmother Ruth, now living in an assisted living facility in Cambridge. At 92, her mind remained sharp even as her body grew frilier. She listened intently as I updated her on the family situation. "You know," she said after I finished, "families are strange organisms. They can be sources of the deepest wounds and the most profound healing, sometimes simultaneously." She patted my hand with gnarled fingers. "The real victory isn't in forgiveness or reconciliation for their sake. It's in finding your way to peace, whatever that looks like." "I think I'm getting there," I replied. "I know you are," she said with the certainty of someone who had witnessed nearly a century of human relationships. "You've built something beautiful from broken pieces. That's no small achievement." That evening, I sat on our apartment balcony, watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in shades of gold and amber. Andrew joined me, handing me a glass of wine before settling into the adjacent chair. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. "I was thinking about family," I said. "Not just blood family, but the one we choose. You, Rachel, Thomas, Eleanor. The people who show up consistently. The people who see you," he added. "Yes." I turned to look at him, this man who had stood beside me through the messiest parts of family reconciliation without judgment. And I was thinking about boundaries, how they're not walls, but thresholds. Places where we decide what comes in and what stays out. He reached for my hand, entwining his fingers with mine. You've gotten good at those decisions. Later that night, I received a text from my mother with a photo attached. It showed a small group gathered in the prison visiting area, my parents, Jason, and Jason's former business partner's elderly mother, whose retirement fund had been among those lost in the fraud. The caption read, "First Victim Reconciliation Meeting. Hard but healing." It was a small step in a long process of restitution, but it represented something I hadn't expected from my family a year ago. The willingness to face consequences directly rather than hiding behind privilege or excuses. I set my phone down, thinking about the journey we had all traveled. The path forward wasn't clear or simple, but it was authentic in a way our previous relationships had never been. We were all learning in our different ways. That true family isn't defined by blood obligation, but by how we treat each other, especially when it's difficult. The person I had become through this process was stronger, clearer about her boundaries, and more compassionate than the wounded daughter who had once sought validation from parents unable to provide it. That transformation was perhaps the most valuable outcome of all. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who hurt you? How did you balance self-protection with the possibility of reconciliation? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that creating healthy boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for genuine relationships to grow. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And remember, family is as much about choice as it is about blood.